Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. This is What's Left. I'm your host, Larry Erickson, and for the next almost half hour, I'm going to be talking about some things that I think are worthy of your attention. And the reactions to the show, they are welcome. My personal email, it's right here. It's whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or if you didn't catch that, go to my website. It's called Lotus, Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be around here somewhere during the show. And you can get the email address from there if you missed it, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather do that. If you do send me email, please, just two things, as always. Include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer. But with those things out of the way, let's get to it. I want to start with some good news, and I especially want to do this because this is particularly good news because I didn't think it was going to happen. Barack Obama, the amazing Mr. O, has commuted the prison sentence of Chelsea Manning. Now, I sincerely hoped he would do this, but I genuinely did not expect him to do it. And needless to say, I'm delighted about it. She will be released on May 17th. Now, Chelsea Manning, in case you've been on a bad acid trip for the past several years, is the former U.S. military intelligence analyst who in 2010 leaked information to WikiLeaks. Some of those documents classified and some of them not classified but called sensitive. Those documents included ones showing U.S. forces committing war crimes in the war in Iraq, particularly the video that became known as Collateral Murder. This video is still available on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, go look at it. Manning was fingered as the leaker after she was ratted on by a supposed friend, the appropriately named Adrian Lamo. She was held in solitary confinement in a military prison for nearly a year on a claim that she was a suicide risk, but which many felt was an attempt to break her because extended solitary confinement is considered torture. An attempt to break her to get her to testify against the government's real target in the case, Julian Assange. That didn't happen, so instead she faced a show trial before a military court. You would do well to remember that the saying, military justice is to justice as military music is to music, still applies. On July 30th, 2013, she was sentenced to 35 years in prison, which is an order of magnitude longer of a sentence than other whistleblowers have gotten. In prison, she was twice more put in solitary. Once for, if you can grasp this, it was punishment for attempting suicide. Now, Obama, on the way out the door, has commuted all but 4 months of her sentence. So Chelsea Manning, American hero, will be freed in May. And how can that not be good news? Now, as a footnote to that, I just want to make clear the legalities of what's going on here. There are two sorts of presidential clemency. One is commutation, that is shortening of a prison sentence. On the other hand, there is a pardon, which is usually thought of as sort of like an official forgiveness for whatever the offense was. An important difference is that commutation leaves the conviction and the assumption of guilt intact. It does not do away with any civil liabilities that arose, such as not being able to sit on federal juries or in many states to vote. Now, full pardon likewise does not suggest innocence, but it does strip away many of those liabilities. With a pardon, a person can vote, they can sit on federal juries, they can own firearms and other things. So personally, I wish Chelsea Manning had gotten a pardon rather than a commutation, but her release remains really good news. What would make this really outstanding news, and which I really, really do not expect to happen, is if Obama would pardon our other American hero, Edward Snowden. All right, moving on from there to one of our regular features. This is the Clown Award, given for meritorious stupidity. Now, I say at the top to you that I swear, I genuinely, honestly swear that I have tried to avoid going to the rump team for clowns. I really have. So I tried to avoid them. So for one thing, for the clown, I considered Thomas Hodgson. He is the sheriff of Bristol County, Massachusetts. And he's come up with a plan to send prisoners to help the rump build his Great Wall of Orange on the border with Mexico. I also considered the Washington Post, which is embracing with gusto its role as mouthpiece of the right-wing status quo, masquerading as a vapid centrism. It did its duty on Martin Luther King Day by arguing that King, despite his rabble-rousing and radical calls for racial and economic justice and his embrace of democratic socialism, was actually a conservative. But the fact is, I couldn't help myself. I just couldn't. The temptation was too strong. So this week, the winner of the Big Red Nose is the Rump's incoming White House Chief of Staff and current chair of the Republican National Committee, Reince Priebus. A few days ago, Congressman and civil rights icon John Lewis suggested that he thought that the Rump was not a legitimate president because he thought that Russian meddling may have affected the outcome. Now, it needs to be repeated here that even assuming the Russians are guilty as charged with hacking and leaking information damaging to Hillary Clinton, there is no good reason to think that that changed the outcome. You could argue, I suppose, that it might have affected the margin, but actually flipped the outcome? No, there's really no good reason to think that. In fact, as I pointed out last week, there is good reason to think that the Russians never expected such an outcome, and that, in fact, it's not even necessarily one they particularly desired. But anyway, Lewis said what he said. And, of course, the whole Gopper world exploded. Especially the Rump himself, who really put his foot in it by responding that, in effect, Lewis is a loser with a crappy district who should know better than to talk smack to his betters. Still, however, Lewis was not alone in this, and an undercurrent of illegitimate and, if there is such a word, an overcurrent of not my president, where it was ongoing. Okay, send in the clown. On Meet the Press, Priebus called Lewis irresponsible and said that he'd started a firestorm and he wanted something done about it. Someone, he said, should step up and, quote, call it what it is. It's wrong what is happening. It's wrong how some of these Democrats are treating President-elect Trump. And who is it that should step up, according to our clown? You already know. It's Barack Obama. Barack Obama. The party Reince Priebus now heads planned on undermining Obama's presidency before he was ever first inaugurated. The party Reince Priebus now chairs declared it a priority to make Obama a one-term president. The man who was about to be Reince Priebus's boss spent years as the patron saint of the birthers, and as recently as July of 2015 refused to say that Obama was born in America. But Reince Priebus thinks it is now Barack Obama's responsibility to step up and defend the legitimacy of Donald the Rump. Now, if I thought he had enough self-awareness to realize what he was doing, I'd say he just had a lot of chutzpah. But frankly, I doubt that he does. Instead, he's a sad little weasel. In other words, Reince, and I admit he does have a cool name, Priebus, is a clown. All right, now our other regular feature. This is called the Outrage of the Week. Okay. Bernie Sanders and Amy Klobuchar, those senators, introduced an amendment that would have allowed pharmacists to import drugs from Canada. Now, because the Canadian government has the legal power to negotiate drug prices with drug companies, medications are virtually, if not across the board, virtually always, cheaper, significantly cheaper in Canada than they are in the U.S. What's more, many of the medications in question are actually made in the U.S. and exported to Canada. And despite being exported and re-imported, they would still be significantly cheaper. Now, the amendment, embracing an idea endorsed by 72% of the American public, attracted the support of a dozen coppers, and in fact would have passed the Senate, except that 13 Democrats voted no, killing it and leaving us still at the mercy of Big Pharma. Why? Well, the excuse given by recent liberal celebrity Cory Booker was that the amendment didn't meet the test of ensuring that foreign drugs meet American safety standards. Except that Canadian standards and procedures for approving drugs are similar to those in the U.S. And no one, including Cory Booker, has been able to point to any Canadian drug scandals that would question their safety. And again, a lot of those drugs are actually made here. But the real proof that consumer protections was not the actual issue here is found in the fact that all 13 of these bozos, including Cory Booker, voted to pass the so-called 21st Century Cures Act. One of those deals where a thin layer of good stuff is actually just the wrapping paper and pretty ribbon around the real present. A boxload of benefits to Big Pharma that, among other giveaways to the medical industry, with the emphasis on industry, would significantly reduce the safety standards that now exist, saving the drug corporations multiple millions and making an utter mockery of the claims of those such as Booker. Under the bill signed into law by the Big O on January 13th, corporations will be able to get approval for new uses of existing drugs without clinical trials, instead relying on so-called real-world evidence, which includes observations, safety and side effect claims, and other data not subject to rigorous examination and analysis. In other words, anecdotes. It also allows the drug makers to promote off-label uses of their drugs to insurance companies, vastly increasing the market for those drugs, while at the same time bypassing the FDA entirely. If protecting patient safety was really all that important to these Dems, that even drugs from another major industrialized nation have to be looked at through with suspicion through narrowed eyes, they could have demanded the removal of these provisions as a price for their support of the bill. But they didn't. They said and did nothing. So if patient safety is not the real reason for voting against the Sanders-Klobuchar amendment, what is? Well, maybe it's just a coincidence that of the top 10 recipients of campaign contributions from pharmaceutical manufacturers, 5 of those Democrats, 9 of those 10 voted against the amendment. Maybe 2, it's just a coincidence that pharmaceutical and medical device companies spent nearly $200 million lobbying for this bill. Or bluntly, maybe it's not a coincidence at all. Maybe it's another indication of whose interests really are central to those in Congress. Maybe it's another indication that the interests of the vast, vast majority of the people of this nation are addressed to the extent and only to the extent that they do not interfere with the interests of the insiders. Maybe it's another indication of how we simply cannot trust the Democrats. I wouldn't even bother with the coppers, but how we cannot trust the Democrats. We cannot rely on the Democrats to act to the benefit of the needy, over the needless, to the benefit of the poor over the powerful, except to the extent that we make them do it. Yes, individual Dems can be good on individual issues on individual occasions. Hell, it could even be true of goppers. Remember, a member dozen of them voted for this amendment. And yes, we can and should work with congressional Dems or whoever else where we can, but we can't rely on them. We have to make sure that they are followers of our campaigns instead of us being followers of theirs. So maybe what all this is at the end of the day is another indication that we actually are on our own. It's up to our strength, our power, and maybe that's just another outrage. Let's take a break. Okay, but let's be clear about something. The fact that we are on our own does not mean we are alone. In the week following the election, I celebrated the ongoing protests against the prospect of the rump and all he represents. And it's clear that that spirit of resistance has not abated. It may have even grown. On Sunday, January 15th, PEN America. This is the American branch of the International Literary and Human Rights Organization, now called PEN International, held a series of events under the banner Writers Resist. They were intended to celebrate the power of language as a tool to express concern over the future of democracy in the United States. There were 93 such events across 37 states, as well as events in at least 8 other nations. On the same day, under the banner of Our First Stand, there were around 70 rallies in the country, with crowds ranging in size from dozens to thousands, opposing repeal of the Affordable Care Act and supporting Medicare, Medicaid, and Planned Parenthood. Many of those rallies urged going beyond mere defense of existing programs to call for creating some form of national health care, some form of single-payer insurance or the like. 1,000 people in Richmond, more than 6,000 in Boston, 10,000 in the suburbs of Detroit, in addition to hundreds in dozens of places from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, California. But beyond even that, resistance does not just lie in large numbers. It also lies in the little actions, especially if they're a little creative. On Tuesday, this last week, dozens of protesters gathered outside the headquarters of Goldman Sachs in New York City, some wearing swamp monster masks in reference to the Rump's pledge to drain the swamp, which he did before picking several former Goldman Sachs executives to join his administration. About 20 of the protesters brought sleeping bags, intending in an echo of Occupy Wall Street to camp out on the street outside the bank until Inauguration Day. Bank security guards sent people around to a different entrance, and their bosses gave no order to remove the protesters, likely because they wanted to avoid any more unhappy attention that the very symbol of corporate greed is getting these days. Now, these next events that I'm going to talk about haven't happened, but they will have happened by the time you see this. But I'm going to cover them anyway because they'll help to fill in the story. On Friday, Inauguration Day, a group of celebrities are banding together for what they're calling a love-a-thon, a 3-hour live broadcast on Facebook with proceeds going to the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, and Earth Justice, the organizations chosen because they represent issues that will be under attack during a Trump administration. Among those taking part are Jane Fonda, Jamie Lee Curtis, Judd Apatow, Patricia Arquette, Christopher Guest, and Tim Robbins. Not exactly an A-plus list talent like Three Doors Down, but they'll do. And then, of course, there is Saturday, the Women's March on Washington. I sincerely hope there will be, or from your perspective was, a huge turnout. Predictions are for tens, scores, hundreds of thousands of people. And right now, as I prepare this, the prospects look good. As one sign, as of January 14th, parking permits have been sought for 1,200 buses for the event. By comparison, fewer than 400 permits had been requested for the inauguration. Now, that may not be the complete total of buses for either event, and the numbers may not really add up that way, but still, it's the difference is striking. Significantly, the D.C. March is not the only one planned. There are a multitude of what are being called sister marches around the country. As of January 17th, by my count of what's on the organizer's website, there are, in addition to the D.C. March, some 231 marches and rallies covering all 50 states and Puerto Rico, plus there are another 156 events in 58 other countries. Oh, and one final thought. For those of you who were reluctant to take part or maybe even didn't take part because you resented the name Women's March on Washington, grow up and get over it. All right, back to the topic. Saturday, will not be the end of actions. The following Monday, January 23rd, students on college campuses around the country will be holding actions calling on their campuses to help address global warming by divesting from the fossil fuel industry and investing in alternative energies. Now, I've said on a number of other occasions that if we are actually going to push some kind of actual political revolution, we need much more than polite conversation, navel-gazing blog posts, and snarky tweets. We need people in the streets. We need to fill the streets. We need to fill the jails, and if it comes to that, we need to fill the camps. We need social disruption. We need no business as usual. We need to be noisy. We need to be in your face. Now, that doesn't mean we need to be violent, but it does mean we have to be determined, creative, and most of all, persistent. We need to pace ourselves because we're in this for the long term, but we need to keep on keeping on without backing out or without backing down or bailing out. Because like the song goes, every victory brings another, carry it on. So I look at that week of events that I just described, and my response is, more, please, much more. All right, next, I want to talk about something I haven't addressed in a while, but was brought up by that last set of student activities that I was just talking about. Global warming, aka climate change. On January 18th, NASA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and the UK Met Office announced that their separate records of surface temperatures across the globe confirmed that 2016 was the hottest year in the historical record. It broke the record set in 2015, which broke the record set in 2014. Meanwhile, on January 9th, NOAA reported that the U.S. had had its second warmest year on record in 2016. Every single state had a warmer than average year. In fact, 2016 ranks as at least the 7th warmest year ever in every single individual state. It also marks the 20th straight year of above-average continental U.S. temperatures as compared to the average for the 20th century as a whole. In fact, according to the U.S. National Climate Data Center, every individual month since February 1985 has been above the average temperature for that month for the 20th century as a whole. It's no longer possible to rationally deny the reality not only of climate change, but of the human cause of it, because nothing else explains what we've seen. Now, the nanny naysayers point to what they claim are, well, there are natural processes that could occur that cause global warming. Well, I'm going to show you graphs of 3 of those natural processes and their effect on temperature. Okay? In each case, the black line is the graph of the actual temperature record. Okay, this one, the green line is the effect of volcanic activity over that time. This one shows the effect of the variations in solar output, solar intensity over that time. This one shows the effect of changes in the Earth's orbit over that same time. You notice that none of them even come close to matching the historical record. On the other hand, one thing does: greenhouse gases. It's gotten to the point where some researchers are saying we have to focus more now on adapting to climate change than on heading it off, because by 2030, the record-breaking heat of 2016 will be normal. It will be just a typical ordinary year. The thing is, we don't have to wait to see those impacts. Something else that happened in the U.S. in 2016, we had the second highest number of weather-related disasters, causing at least $1 billion in damage each. There were 15 such examples, together causing $46 billion in damage, causing 138 deaths. And the climate in the Arctic at this time is getting strange. Temperatures in Barrow, Alaska in November were 36 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. And sea ice on the Arctic Ocean is at a record low. Global warming is altering, in fact, the entire ecology of the Arctic Ocean on a huge scale, which is thought to be related to a huge die-off of puffins in the area. This last fall, many of those birds appearing to have starved to death. And at the other end of the world, 2016 saw the biggest ever die-off of coral and the Great Barrier Reef off Australia. And scientists have realized that the West Antarctic ice sheet is melting from the inside out and could completely collapse in less than 100 years, which would raise global sea levels by about 10 feet. It's no longer adequate to say that we are screwing with the climate. We have to say We have screwed with the climate. We have screwed up the climate. And even the attempts by officials to be upbeat have a hollow ring when you get past the puffery. For example, outgoing Energy Secretary Ernst Moniz said that there is great progress being made on climate, and the progress is irreversible. Now, there is some truth to what he says. Clean energy and renewable energy technologies have gotten much more effective and much cheaper over the past years. For example, the cost of wind farms has declined by 41% since 2008, and the cost of utility level solar power has dropped 61% in that same time. The global market for such technologies will only grow, and manufacturing industry executives who have to plan investments on like a 30-year timeline, as a result of this, are unlikely to look to invest in high-carbon technologies. Meanwhile, the move from coal to natural gas, which is less carbon intensive, also has an impact. But here, in fact, right there is where we start to get past the puffery. The switch from coal to natural gas did not occur because natural gas is cleaner with regard to global warming and the climate. It's happened because it's cheaper, which means that will only continue so long as that continues to be true. And meanwhile, natural gas is still a fossil fuel. Meanwhile, the energy industry is still talking about the chimera of clean coal. And Moniz enthused about a doubling of domestic oil production as if that was a good thing. In other words, the vision being presented to us is not one of a carbon-free economy, not even of a low-carbon economy, but rather of just a less high-carbon economy. That's simply not good enough. Especially not when you're now facing the prospect of an administration led by a man who has openly proposed scrapping NASA climate research, is filling his administration with hardcore climate deniers, and appears to be readying a witch hunt against Energy Department staff who have promoted climate change programs. Now, I'm not ready to give up, certainly not yet. Especially not when we have plans out there, plans I have talked about on this show, that could convert us to a carbon-free economy in about 30 or 40 years. But the truth is, I have to tell you right now, I am not hopeful. All right, so let's at least try to get through this and end up without any more doom and gloom. So let's take a quick sideline. I got about 1 minute here. We're going to go to And Another Thing, our occasional foray into things cool, but and not, at least not intentionally political. And this is the cool thing I have to tell you about. There is going to be, I just learned about this myself, there's going to be a total eclipse of the sun on August 21st, visible across a wide swath of the United States. The path of totality will hit the coast just south of Salem, Oregon, pass over 10 states before leaving the shores just south of, of Charleston, South Carolina. I got my north and south messed up there. It'll be the last total eclipse visible in the United States, and I believe anywhere in the United States, until at least 2024. And I am already making plans. All right, so that's it. We are going to get out of here. I am completely out of time. So right now, you just go ahead and you have the best week that you possibly can. We will see you in 2 weeks. If you're watching the show the last week of January, then it's a repeat because we always take the last week off. So we will see you in 2 weeks. You have the best 2 weeks you possibly can. As always, peace.